We're now very excited to continue with our Valletta Tech Summit, focusing now on IoT and sustainability. But before, let me introduce you our next panelists to discuss sustainability and IoT. So thank you so much to all our 5 panelists for joining us virtually to share your wisdom, insights, and knowledge on sustainability and IoT. Maybe just to give us a better understanding and set the tone, Ravzan from EY maybe can enlighten us why IoT can help different sectors in our economy become more sustainable.
Thank you very much. Indeed, when it comes to sustainability, IoT can be applied in a large number of ways. There are a number of preconceptions when it comes to the applications of IoT and sustainability and the environment that it can only be focused around direct environmental factors such as air quality or measuring specific levels of chemicals in the air or specific or the consumage patterns of specific fuels. Actually, when it comes to sustainability, it goes way beyond the environment. Sustainability these days is becoming something that is being deeply ingrained into the core of each individual company, of each organization. And tracking sustainability and understanding how products, whether they are digital, whether they are physical, whether they are from specific sectors, whether it be retail, whether it be consumer, whether it be industrial or direct B2B or B2C, can be enabled through IoT by understanding, extrapolating the data at the core, where the data is being created, and extrapolating that data and creating insights into how usage patterns, how not necessarily only manufacturing, but also in day-to-day operational activities. Sustainability can be enabled through a more consumer and sustainable, aware mindset that can be applied through the data that is being collected through IoT.
So thank you so much, Razvan. So I don't know if I can drop in James wants to say something, I believe, so feel free. Hans Dames from Hitachi, feel free to chip in and share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me to join this incredibly important panel. I think it's important because we're talking about very important societal issues. How are we going to make sure that our children and our grandchildren will continue to have a world to live in with dealing with climate change in particular, which is one of the big issues we're all confronted with for the foreseeable future. And I think from my side, working for a large Japanese company, which is Hitachi, IoT is the great way to bring together the physical with the digital world. How are we going to use the data, the massive amounts of data that are coming out of, for example, transport and mobility systems? How are we going to use the data coming out of that and to give value to that data to help us achieve that more sustainable world? And from my side, I just want to give 3 examples. The first example is very basic. Hitachi runs a lot of trains, particularly here in the UK where I'm based, and we're using the data of all of our trains to make sure that services are on time. And that we, in other words, have trains which are there ready to be put in service. And what is the sustainable advantage? That is, if there's a reliable transport system, people will be taking less to train. That's actually very basic. Second example is here in London. Hitachi is involved with the largest IoT project in the world when it comes to EV and the charging from cars. And working with partners, the likes of Uber, Royal Mail and British Gas, we are collecting a lot of data when it comes to the charging of fleets of cars, of electric cars, and how that is going to match with the electricity grid. And the sustainability benefit there, of course, is to help the transition to the electrification of fleets of cars. The third example, which I would like to bring in, and something I'm personally incredibly excited about, is how we can help IoT to maintain and to safeguard the rainforest. We're working with the Rainforest Connection, which is a startup company basically, and they have developed technology which helps to listen to the sound of the rainforest. And by interpreting the sounds with data to try to understand when potentially illegal loggers are coming in, we can become much more clever, much more proactive to avoid illegal logging. So what we've done is listen to a lot of data of the woods and try to understand when there are patterns, when, for example, animals recognize and become more scared when there's, for example, a truck coming in, which helps then the rangers to get a much more precise idea of where they need to go rather than trying to protect and to be anywhere at any time. We now have a system which is much more focused, data-driven, IoT-based, in helping to safeguard and to maintain the rainforest.
Mr. Dames, I'd like to invite now Engineer Michael Bonello from Sense Innovation, a subsidiary of telecommunications company Go. Possibly, Engineer Bonello, you can enlighten us on this importance of strategic energy consumption monitoring in commercial buildings, because I know you have a keen interest on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. Yes, regarding metering, we are all familiar with having a meter at one point in a building, you know, and having the consumption of the building billed or perhaps even monitored on a monthly basis. However, if one were to really understand how energy is being consumed in a building, one has to think rather more long-term, you know. So one has to identify areas which are energy consuming areas. And after, of course, identifying the type of energy or the utility that is being consumed, utility could be water, electricity, energy, you have also fuel, you have gas. Of course, one has to deploy the right meters, you know. So it is fuel meter, electricity meter, gas meter. This way, one can start to build a profile, like a signature, of the energy consumption in the building, you know. And from this data, which can be granular to the point of demand. You know, you have demand and you have consumption, as we have with the electricity meter at home. Let's say that, for example, that one always counts, you know, count by count, always going up. But when you have demand, you have energy consumption in 15 or 30 minutes intervals, which means that this granularity then will help in actually identifying when power is being, or when energy is being consumed. So one can identify, for example, there are anomalies. For example, if at night, when nothing should be happening, you can have a peak. Or when you are on the weekend, for example, and no one is in the building, or public holiday, and you still have consumption. Why are these things happening, And perhaps you can also then benchmark, you say, why my energy, my kilowatt hour, okay, per square meter per year, for example, is higher than that in other buildings, which could be owned by the same owner, it could be a similar building owned by someone else. And these benchmarks start to make a person think, I mean, as we all know, unless we measure, and we measure intelligently, we can call it strategically, which means looking forward, we cannot take any action. So it's very important to measure, put the right measurement in place, decide on the granularity, how accurate or how detailed, not accurate, how detailed your consumption measurement is. And over a period of time, then one will start to see some things which most likely would have been overlooked because there was no visibility before. So basically, in a nutshell, this is why we need strategic metering, basically, on energy consumption and utilities.
Yeah, thank you so much, Engineer Bonello. I'd like to invite now Engineer Nicholas Borch-Calleja. He's the founder at Marine Hound. Possibly we don't immediately link IoT and the maritime industry, but I know you're working on helping marine operators become more sustainable in this regard. So maybe you can share some insights on that.
Yes, exactly, Keith. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And we focus on sustainability, on a job that needs to be done. So there are many conventions for port officers, especially enforcement officers, to make sure that the fuel that is being used by the shipping industry is that of a low sulfur fuel, because it impacts everybody. And there are so many conventions out there that officers can be overloaded with the job that has to be done. So we use IoT to bring pollution monitoring and connectivity, and share this information in real time with the port officers to take action when it is needed. And that is how you make that job sustainable. And we ensure effectiveness and high performance in that.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you so much, Engineer Borch-Calleja. I'd like to invite now Mr. Michael Bianchi from Deloitte. He's the Director of the Financial Services section within Deloitte. I know, Mr. Bianchi, your keen interest in all this data, how we're going to use that data, the authenticity, the audit trail, data integrity. What's your take on all this? And also reporting.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think what's important to note is that the reporting obligations that are coming into force in the near future are effectively bringing all the discussion points that we here on the panel are bringing to the table into focus, because effectively we will have a situation where entities and their auditors will start to have to report on their sustainability matters. So this falls under the umbrella, and this is where I want to talk a little bit about the CSRD. The CSRD is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is, it follows on from the NFRD. The NFRD I won't speak too much about because it's being phased out, but the CSRD is somewhat, it's got teeth, right? So the CSRD will require companies to look at 3 angles of sustainability. So we're talking about the E, the S, and the G. So ESG is a terminology we're all getting very used to. So entities are going to have to look at reporting under the environmental lens. So what is an entity doing with regards to its consumption of materials, its procurement of those materials, its use, its impact on the environment, the lifespan of the items that it's producing, the biodegradability of those items, etc., etc. You then have the social aspect of the entity. So what is the corporation doing towards society, towards its employees? How is it treating the gender pay gap, for example? So these are all matters that are becoming very important and have always been important, really, but are now require reporting on. And the G, the last one, is governance. So what is the board makeup? Is the board representative of society, or is it made up of your traditional board members? You know, does it have an all-encompassing makeup, bringing in the young, bringing in the LGBTIQ, bringing in the females, you know, onto the board? Is there that diversity? So that's what ESG is all about. Now, to get to, I will get to IOTA in a minute, but so what you have is companies need to start looking at these reporting obligations and saying what is the entity's strategy? So at a strategy level, what is the entity's strategy to meet and possibly surpass the directive obligations? And how do those now fit in with the operative model? Because the operative model wasn't built for the CSRD, it was built based on, you know, years and years of practice. So, and this is where technology will help quantum leap companies from one system and process into another. So you take possibly office spaces using IOTA, Internet of Things, to direct energy production towards particular areas of an office building, for example, or checking the quality of the air of a particular enterprise, if that is important, you know. So I think this is where it's important. It's important to link up the strategy under the CSRD with the underlying technology. I think that's fundamental.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing insights on the new adoption of the EU Sustainability Reporting Standards through this directive, the CSRD. Razvan, maybe you can share with us what are the challenges in applying IoT to enable, in a meaningful way, sustainability?
Yes, well, there are a number of challenges when it comes to the insights that can be gathered from IoT data and understanding how they apply directly to sustainability. As IoT is being applied for commercial reasons, for optimization reasons within organizations to better understand their day-to-day operations and their to optimize their processes and to understand consumption resource utilization within their organizations, depending on the independent sectors within which they operate. The application of that specific data to sustainability purposes is sometimes not very clear. For that reason, from a strategic perspective, as Rolando was saying, it's important to analyze and to understand from a strategy perspective what does sustainability mean in the context of my organization, depending on which sector I operate in. As I previously mentioned, it doesn't necessarily just apply to organizations that have a direct environmental impact. Sustainability can be is relevant to any and all organizations relevant of the sector that they operate in, whether it's retail, whether it's even consumer direct or B2C interaction. Organizations have a sustainability component that can be directly applied to enhance their eventual compliance to sustainability, to ESG goals, and to environmental requirements. The challenges are, of course, number one, at a strategic level, understanding what the sustainability in the context of my organization. Then going lower to the actual technological application of that, understanding how the data that I am gathering, that I am creating through the application of IoT and other similar technologies, how that can be applied to better to gain insight onto meeting those regulatory and strategic ESG goals.
Thank you so much, Razvan. You raised an important point, if I may, understanding the meaning of sustainability within your organization. And possibly I'd like to invite now Mr. Dames, coming from a multinational organization such as Hitachi. I know your personal and professional interest in the Paris Climate Agreement, but possibly small and medium-sized organizations cannot really relate to the real meaning of aligning to the obligations of COP26 and of course the Paris Agreement. What are the key changes that possibly such enterprises can undertake to become more sustainable?
And thank you very much. It is indeed an important point. And yes, I am in charge of everything which Hitachi was doing as part of being a principal partner of COP26. And at COP26 in Glasgow, there was this terrible positive energy towards making clear how business can help to achieve the world to realize its climate change objectives. And I think independently of whether a company is big or small, there is something, and building up on what Razvan and Michael from Deloitte were saying, is how do you connect sustainability with your strategy? Because sustainability is all very nice, but how does it link with your strategic objectives? And I think IoT is an incredibly powerful tool, but at the end of the day, it's only a means to reach an objective. And that's what I think is very much common to all companies, whether they're big, small, whether they are in one sector or in many sectors, is how you're going to use the data which is available to you to improve your processes, to improve your outcomes, to improve your products, to improve the way you operate. And I think also building on what Razvan was saying, what are you going to get out of the data to align better with your business objectives? And I think ultimately at the end of the day, that's the same whether you're big or small.
I'd like to invite Mr. Michael Bianchi because possibly he might share some insights from his professional experience on how businesses are trying to truly embrace sustainability in becoming and being truly linked to their strategic objectives. What are the observations you're noticing there, Mr. Bianchi?
It's a tricky one because at the moment the CSRD is still yet to be implemented, at least locally. But I think one of the things that an entity needs to do is really to look at the long-term plan. So it needs to sort of think macro, right? And think where do I want to get to? And then on the basis of that, start planning out mini goals, and each of those goals are directed towards that macro vision. Now, when it comes to the implementation of this, it's an element of dealing with the various stakeholders and professionals out there and in the industry, which inherently is going to be a multidisciplinary model. So it's not something where you traditionally just go to your lawyer or go to your accountant. This has to be one where you're embracing the engineers and their feedback. You're speaking to the accountants as well, of course. And it's really having that landscape of professionals who are feeding in. Also to note is credibility. I think in building a process and in building this macro vision, it's great to have the technology to feed the data, but inherently you have to have credibility in the data you are publishing. So one needs to think about corporate governance around the data. So as part of these micro decisions towards your macro vision, you need to inbuild and think through and strategize who is going to be inputting the data or what is going to be inputting that data. How is it going to be verified and by who? What audit trails are there on the database? How many copies are there of that database? Who has access to them? Do they get deleted? Etc., etc. So that if any third-party organization wants to and will have to, under the CSRD, look at that information, they can do that with comfort that it is accurate and complete and can be relied upon. And I think for stakeholders, because we need to also bear in mind, why are we doing this? We're doing this, of course, for the planet, true, but we're also doing it for our stakeholders. So who are our stakeholders? So if you are business owners out there, who are the stakeholders? Your customers, your employees, your investors, your procurement, so your procurement chain. If you will start to find situations where companies will not purchase stock or deliverables from you unless you are able to produce certain criteria, certain ESG criteria on your material that you're selling to them. Now, if they find out that the data you're passing on is inaccurate or incomplete, then they lose confidence in your operation. So it's sort of quite cyclical around the credibility of the data and the governance of that data. I think those two principles need to go hand in hand.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bianchi. Engineer Borj Kaleja, mentioning data and audit trail and making sure that the data is being shared. Are you noticing any challenges there from marine operators, maritime operators in this regard?
Yes. So to make maritime operation sustainable, first we have to deliver an impact, and we cannot deliver our impact without being ourselves profitable and sustainable. And this is a trade-off between delivering our value proposition to the maritime industry, that is, we provide pollution information anywhere and anytime, and gauge this to the cost structure that we have. So, and this is how IoT solves this challenge, because bandwidth is now very cheap compared to in past years you had to send people to actually take samples or actually read data from instruments. So this is where IoT makes it more sustainable and profitable for us, and then we can deliver that value to make other enterprises, other stakeholders in the maritime value chain sustainable themselves, and as well economically viable as well.
Simply, Engineer Borj Kaleja, what you're saying is that IoT is helping marine operators to possibly perform predictive maintenance operations as well, right?
Predictive maintenance is mostly for us as well, because once we stop delivering value, that is the information to the operators, we lose money, basically. And so to avoid that, we also use IoT for our advantage to keep track of our assets, our hardware assets, because if they stop, we stop making money. So we apply predictive maintenance such that we can know beforehand when this hardware asset is going to stop, okay? And we take action before it stops. And so we make sure that we provide data information that doesn't stop.
So, Engineer Bonello, what we're saying here in this discussion, we're noticing that IoT, it's translating, digitizing the physical world, right? But what we're telling operators is that they have data, they have a lot of data, and they can translate it into something meaningful in trying to become more sustainable. What are the challenges? What are the perceptions, or possibly what are the real life scenarios you're facing in your day-to-day operations at Sense Innovation?
Okay, first of all, the ubiquity of Wi-Fi, and connectivity to the internet actually makes it very easy for an IoT device, whether it is just a very basic temperature sensor running off a battery connected to a controller connected to the internet, or whether it's an even more intelligent IoT device, could be like a small edge device, like a little computer, and it can connect directly to the internet. So the thing is, data, okay, and then collected continuously, can then be processed, okay, off-site where appropriate algorithms are actually employed. We talk about machine learning and all this stuff. Machine learning is a set of tools, algorithms, okay, which will take the data, and start to look for patterns. Effectively, any type of decision which is not crisp, which means that if I press the switch, there will be a light which comes on, assuming the lamp is healthy, okay? That is crisp. You don't need AI, you don't need machine learning. But when you have parameters, like let's take an example, a room, okay? How are we going to improve the performance of the air conditioning system and optimize without compromising the comfort of the guest or the employee or the tenant, So in that case, for example, we take three variables. We take outside temperature, inside temperature, and occupancy of the building. I mean, you cannot just take these three various inputs, and then put it in an equation and get an answer. You need to collect data. And then what you do with this data, you start to analyze and patterns start to come up. Now, the more data you have, the more the pattern will start to show itself to a point where the probability, we're talking about probabilities because this is statistical, the probability of a certain effect is going to take place, which in our case is to have the lowest consumption of energy without creating any use, because you can switch off, save a lot of energy, but you will have a lot of complaints, of course. Then when the probability increases because of the increase in data, then that is when data will turn into information which actually makes sense. So as Nicholas was mentioning, bandwidth now is available. You can just send data, reams of data. Computers are powerful, they are cheap as well. So all this is ripe for the picking, related to the IoT paradigm, basically.
Engineer Bonello, Ravzan, maybe being a technology consultant yourself, possibly you can share with us some professional experience and real-life scenarios of how businesses are using that data in a tangible and effective way to become more sustainable.
Yes, of course. So across, as I previously mentioned, across a large number of sectors, and those were some very good examples provided by my colleagues here. In a number of scenarios, particularly when it comes to sustainability, I've experienced a number of scenarios where specific optimization opportunities were identified, particularly by accident, which is why IoT is really a door opener. It's an opportunity for organizations, not only in terms of sustainability, in terms of general operational excellence and efficiency, in gathering data points and gathering multiple data points and applying IoT to a number of areas within an organization, ranging from room presence, energy efficiency, energy consumption, item tracking, asset tracking, movement of assets, timing of specific operations within either a specific process, whether it be manufacturing, whether it actually be an actual human process. All these additional data points congregate to a dataverse, so to say, a data fabric that enables insights that were previously not considered. So having then data scientists, either dedicated data scientists or data analysts or external parties, sift through that data and understand the context both from within a business perspective relevant to that specific organization, or from a much wider perspective, looking at it not only with the tunnel vision of that specific organization, but within the greater context of how that organization operates externally, both with their clients, with suppliers, with other external parties and stakeholders pertaining to that organization, enables insights that would otherwise previously not even be considered or not be considered relevant, both from an operational perspective, from an optimization perspective, and from a sustainability perspective. Now, this is where the strategic part of sustainability comes into play, and looking at that data from a sustainability point of view, from a sustainability perspective. This is something that prior to the emergence of ESG as a very prevalent topic in today's business landscape, organizations have been doing organically to a certain extent, not with the purpose of optimizing sustainability, their organization in terms of sustainability, but optimizing their organization in terms of resource management and operating profit, which for most organizations, this is the beauty, I think, of ESG that is currently emerging. There is direct association between operational efficiency, enhanced profits, and sustainability. And this is something that I think we will see a large increase in going forward.
Thank you so much, Razvan. Maybe to add on what you just shared with us, Razvan, Mr. Bianchi, I'd like to ask you, because many businesses potentially, as Mr. Razvan mentioned earlier, they have been working so far in trying to achieve sustainability organically, but through the CSRD and possibly through other international obligations, they now need to act, monitor, and report. For many businesses, this might be an added cost. I don't know if you can enlighten us on any grants, fiscal incentives for such enterprises to benefit from.
No, absolutely. So first of all, I completely agree with what Razvan was saying in terms of there's a misnomer that doing something sustainable is actually adding more cost to the bottom line. It's actually the other way around. You will actually make your business more profitable. And I think one needs to bear in mind the stakeholders again, because you need to think of it in a long-term manner. So you might have some investment to bring your, let's say, your operation into the modern age, and that gets amortized, right, over the lifespan, or so it's a balance sheet item that gets amortized. But in the long term, you are going to be what I like to call future-proof, because you will attract more customers, you will attract more young talent to your organization because they like the mantra, they like what you represent in society in terms of trying to make an impact, a positive impact. So all these things are very important. When it comes to the reporting and the grants, it's not actually just the grants that will become relevant here. It's also the interest rate lending that you might find on your loans, on your loan facilities. So you have a market force happening at the banking level, where over time you will start to see preferential rates being offered to entities or to clients, to a bank who have more sustainable goals. And for that, of course, you need to prove what you're doing. So it exists already. So if you go at a micro level, if you had to go and buy a car on a personal level today, the bank differentiates in giving a loan. So it gives you one interest rate if you're buying a combustion engine. It gives you a more preferential rate if you're buying a battery-operated car. Now, if you expand that significantly on a corporate lending relationship, that could save you many thousands in the bottom line in terms of interest cost. So this is a direct correlation between your financial performance and your sustainability matrices. Grants, there's the both at an EU level as well as at a local level. There are a lot of grants and incentives which are out there, which are, let me say, ready for the picking. It's just a matter of putting your application together in such a way that the funding will be made available to you. I have had, and we have had multiple conversations, with stakeholders at government level, and we understand that today the money is there, ready and waiting, and it's just a matter of companies understanding what grants and incentives there are, I can't talk to specific grants and incentives because each business needs to look at their own operations, but there are grants on digitalization, there are grants on panels, there are grants on cars and fleets, there are grants on buildings and windows. So depending on the pain point, going back to the strategy, so what's the company strategy? then you focus on grants. But with all that, we need to also talk about the integrity of the data, as we said before. So one thing I want to highlight, if I may, Keith, is one of the whips or teeth that the CSRD has is that it's going to be implementing a concept of assurance on the data which is being produced. And I think that's fundamental because the banks will want it, because if you go for a grant, the government will want it, etc., etc. Now, over here, it will start off, and I don't want to get too technical, but so I'll use generic terms. It will start off with what's limited assurance is the term, right? So, which is a light touch audit approach on the data that is produced under the CSRD. And however, it will move quickly, this is the anticipation, it will move quickly to have the same detailed analysis as the financial statements audit. So in order for you as an entity, as an enterprise, to take benefit of the interest from the bank, to take benefit from the grants, you will have to be producing data which withstands the poking and the pinching from an audit process. So key to answer your question, I suppose, in a nutshell, yes, there are granted incentives. Yes, there's a direct correlation to improved profits. However, let's not underestimate the integrity of the data.
So much, Mr. Bianchi. To add on what Mr. Razvan mentioned earlier, Mr. Dames, I'd like to ask you, because I do understand that sustainability has become from a nice to have to a must have, and almost strategic driven in any organization. Possibly you can share with us some insights in how Hitachi tried to embrace this evolution over the past few years and trying to embrace sustainability truly, if I may.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. I think it's the natural evolution that it goes from a nice to have to a must. And that is because of lots of internal and external factors for everyone. I think it's fairly clearly made the point by Michael, by the requirements, the need for reporting. I think as well that companies now have understood that sustainability is also about the what and the how of the company. I think how is to have your own internal operations and to be sure that you meet with your targets in terms of Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, but also in terms of the what. And the best stories, I believe, is ones where the sustainability and the strategy come together and they overlap each other and support each other. And for our company, and it's interesting because we announced earlier today in Tokyo our new midterm management plan. We really see this combination between green, digital and innovation underpinned by IoT as the future growth engine for the company. And that's why we see projects like helping, because everyone is confronted with the need for electrification. But when you are in a large bus company, it is incredibly difficult to do so. So where we see ourselves coming in is where we can help others based on our own experience to make this transition based on data. And one great example which we have is when it came to Glasgow, where there was COP26, helped the local bus company to provide a completely electrified fleet of buses. Because I think we're all going through the challenge, which has been clearly demonstrated in this panel, how difficult and how challenging it is going to be. But if you are able to come up with the right business model, if you come up with the right technologies underpinned by the data on which you get value, I think there are going to be clearly opportunities for those companies that see the opportunity and are able to deliver against it in the most effective way based on a data-driven model.
Thank you, Mr. Dames. So possibly I'd like to rope in now Engineer Bonello and possibly also Engineer Boch-Calleja, because we're understanding, even following Mr. Dames' remarks, that the companies' approach towards sustainability has evolved, has changed over the past few years, and possibly it will even change more significantly through this European Green Deal, the Fit for 55, CSRD, so the obligations, international obligations, especially from the European Union, are certainly going to increase significantly over the past few months. So in this context, what are your views, and possibly what are the views of your stakeholders, partners in your sectors, in your different business sectors you're working in?
Shall I start? Okay. We work mostly in the hospitality industry and also branching out in commercial buildings as well. Sustainability has really, how shall I say, the awareness has really increased. I mean, before we were just approached, you know, for maybe like minor projects, you know, and we had to do most of the, you know, chasing, so to speak, and hopefully educating our clients. But nowadays, this, especially in the sector in which we work, is basically, it's all the opposite now. I mean, they are coming to us, okay, how can we save, how can we become more sustainable, save on our energy consumption? Because that's where we can help, basically. This, of course, has been exacerbated by what was happening during COVID, you know, where travel was basically curtailed. And nowadays, the situation that we have with the war, you know, and all of these are affecting heavily sustainability, talking from the energy perspective of our clients, basically. So it's no longer that us going out to tell them, hey, we are here, we can do something. They know about us and they do come to us as well, you know. So it's quite interesting how the dynamics, you know, are shifting in this type, in our experience, basically, in our work.
That's fantastic. So, Engineer Borj Kaleya, I don't know what's your take on this, and possibly how IoT fits in all this as well.
I agree very much with Michael when he said there's this dynamic shift with now stakeholders accepting being sustainable, because now taking the maritime value chain, ports are competing for the green certificates. Ships are competing because now the fuel prices have gone up, especially with low sulfur fuel, and they want to make sure that other ships competing with them are not using illegal, cheaper fuel, because at the end of the day, it hurts them. So then IoT, which is one technology that we are using, actually helps us to deliver that value, both to ports and shipping companies and any partner that partners with us, basically.
That's great. Thank you so much, Engineer Borj Kaleya. So, Mr. Bianchi, given the context I mentioned earlier, do you see that the businesses are going to embrace all these changes in a more sustainable manner, or from what you're sensing, they're more reluctant? What's your take there?
So my view is that on the basis that companies look at the whole mantra of the ESG and sustainability under the lens of CSR, corporate social responsibility, I think that if it will be like that, then they will be reluctant to take it on, because it is not a corporate social responsibility. It's a program of its own right. It's something much more than a function to you know, to put in a corner under talent or an HR facet. I think it's something which needs to be discussed strategically at board level, embraced. You might also contemplate having as an entity, as a sustainability officer who works hand in hand with the CFO, the financial controller, because you need to have someone who's focused on driving the agenda and the implementation of a strategy under any form of sustainability measures. But that and then needs to dovetail, of course, with the financials, because here the board of directors needs to act in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders and return value, to the shareholders. That's ultimately the objective of the board. So having a sustainability officer not working with the financial world, the financial team of the same organization, wouldn't reconcile to my mind. So the more integration there is at that level, and the more participation there is at the C-suite level, the more likely it is that the entity will have a success in the implementation of its sustainability goals, ultimately to, as we were saying before, to improve its bottom line. I think there needs to be also a stratification of companies. So you've got your listed companies who have, of course, already existing obligations and will continue to have the highest obligations, and rightly so, because they are the larger entities within our society and the ones that have the larger impact. That does not mean that the SMEs, the smaller entities, also start working on a macro strategy. We have some SMEs locally in Malta and across Europe, which are very big. So I don't think one should assess and gloss over the CSRD and say, okay, I'm not a large entity under the definition. This doesn't apply to me. Thank you very much. I think entities which still have 200 employees, many millions of turnover, a fleet of trucks and what have you, whatever the business might be, those businesses, when you start to aggregate their impact, will be significant. So sustainability is not about large one-off decisions by entities, but many millions of smaller decisions by individuals and corporations, and that is the impact we need to achieve.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Mr. Bianchi. One last question, possibly to Mr. Dames and Mr. Razvan, regarding the environmental impact of IoT devices, because we're discussing sustainability, but we failed to discuss the impact of creating devices with potential, which are potentially harmful for the environment. How important is it to make sure that the devices we're using and trying to connect different devices are environmentally sound?
So no, it's extremely important, and I think it's why the part of the overall environmental performance as a company. What's your impact overall on the environment? And I think maybe one final point here when it comes to data. Data helps you if you know how you perform yourself. You can set KPIs which then are going to be an improvement driver for your business. And ultimately, if you link your financial compensation of your leaders, not only to financial targets, but also to wider ESG, you can really see this as a way to improve your performance driven by your strategy. So we've set clearly for ourselves very clear targets when it comes to the reduction of our carbon emissions in Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 by 2030 and by 2050 as part of our aim to become net zero.
So, Mr. Razvan?
So that's actually a very good point that you make, Keith, regarding the environmental impact of IoT applications themselves. As IoT has been, it's been an emerging sector for quite a while now. I believe it's been almost a decade since the initial, applications beyond the heavy industrial applications have started emerging in a more popular fashion. Obviously, sensors and hardware, IoT-specific hardware has evolved significantly since then, and we're seeing huge improvements in energy usage and materials used. We are seeing sustainability, ironically, being applied directly in IoT manufacturing, IoT, which is the beauty of sustainability, that it can be applied across sectors and across disciplines. And a lot of companies are also reconsidering for this specific purpose the implementation, large-scale implementations of IoT that we see, for example, in automotive manufacturing, where the large-scale implementations are absolutely humongous with the number of sensors and devices ranging into hundreds of thousands, if not millions, we're talking about devices which have an impact on energy consumption, on children usage, on having to replace the same device with the exact same outdated version for compatibility reasons, for maintenance purposes, and so on. We are seeing a shift right now also to the IoT market and moving towards more low energy, more devices manufactured from recycled materials, and reuse of existing non-IoT related hardware and computing devices for IoT purposes. Meaning that even from an investment perspective, large-scale deployments of IoT, there is not necessarily a direct dependency. We have two components to IoT from a hardware perspective, right? The sensors and the actual computing. Obviously, the trend today is edge computing and cloud computing, where the majority of the processing is being built off-site, which also optimizes from a certain perspective energy consumption. But for a large number of applications and for specific sectors and companies, the processing does need to happen a little bit closer to home, to where the data is being gathered. This provides two main advantages, which directly relates to what my plans have been saying regarding data integrity, having better control over the data, having the data closer to home, and having the ability to cleanse that data at a very early stage in its inception, ensuring that the data being provided to the ultimate reporting and the insight generation process is being cleansed. And two, ensuring that being able to use existing hardware to leverage existing capabilities that are already being used for other purposes within the organization to apply directly to your IT implementation, thus optimizing resources.
Thanks so much, Razvan. We do have two specific questions to you. So I don't know if Mr. Bianchi, Engineer Bonello, or Engineer Boch-Kalle, or possibly Razvan and Mr. Dames wants to answer the following question. So the first question relates directly to sustainability and security. One of the attendees is asking whether there is a general set of regulations that needs to be met by the IoT devices services in Malta or Europe, or in Europe in general. So, and the second question is how IoT can improve return on investment in the gaming sector, for instance. So I don't know who can share some insights into these questions. So if they're too specific, too technical, we just leave it here. But otherwise, I don't know if you can share some insights into these questions. So the first one is, when it comes to IoT, sustainability and security, are there any set of regulations that need to be met by the IoT devices or services in Malta or Europe?
I'll take this one if nobody else wants to. So IoT at this stage is not directly regulated as, but I do want to mention this. IoT, applications of IoT, have wider implications, meaning the data generated by IoT devices is being applied for a multitude of operations and processes within an organization. It can have impact on the finance operations, it can have impact on the governance, on the legal, on the operating side, on many, many aspects. For the regulations applied to IoT are hierarchical and overarching, meaning that while there are no direct regulations being applied to IoT devices themselves, the regulations from the compliance requirements for specific regulations and policies apply directly to IoT in relation to the processes that they support, meaning that IoT devices need to be secure, the data provided by IoT devices needs to be in the proper formats, needs to be accurate, needs to be timely, needs to respect all the data quality prerequisites and conditions required by the specific processes that they support.
Razvan Neems from, so Engineer Bonello?
If I may add something to what has been said, from our perspective, we design IoT edge devices for room energy management. And one of the main issues, or one of the main points, which we are not an issue, the main points of concern is, okay, hackability. I mean, if we are hacked, what's going to happen, you know? Is someone going to switch on and switch off the light of our hotel remotely, as happened some years ago, actually? So in fact, just to follow up from the technical point of view, sense an IoT device which has edge capabilities, which has computing capabilities, not just a temperature sensor, it will host a number of web pages which are for setting up the system, for example, like a typical router, for example. So first of all, the first line of defense would be to have username and password. So that's the credential. But what if these are hacked? First of all, the password has to be set to a certain number of different characters, certain length, and stuff like that, which is what everyone is aware of and familiar with, I presume. But then what if the actual device is hacked? What's happening to the data? So we have to think about the data itself. So in order to protect the data, it's encrypted to AES-256, which is one of the state-of-the-art encryption methods used quite profusely, basically. So this, especially being on the internet, is risky. But of course, risk has to be mitigated, and these two steps do help in the mitigation of risk. When it comes to data security, there is the acronym CIA. You need confidentiality, you need integrity, you need availability, effectively. So this is something which we always keep in mind.
So much, Engineer Michael Bonello, Engineer Nicholas Borch-Calleja, Mr. Michael Bianchi, Mr. Hans Dames, and also Mr. Razvan Names for sharing with us amazing and very insightful insights during this discussion focusing on IoT and sustainability. We're going to have a short break, networking break, so feel free to mingle and network with other attendees. And soon after, around in approximately half an hour, we will look into and discuss, analyze the legal and ethical implications of OIT in its different applications. So a 30-minute break, and then we'll be back with another in-person, this time in-person panel discussion.